I want to first start and say thank you to our presenters today. They're giving up their time to come here to do this, and it is very, very much appreciated. We worked on a format, and I want our format to be one to be exactly what we wanted it to be a very informative day for us. There is no push, pro or con today. We want to find out as much as we can. In fact, this all started as previously Pro Tem Treat had requested the study, and due to his work schedule, I agreed to sponsor his request, and which led to today's hearing. In a short time since I agreed to chair this study, I've heard from a number of people on the subject. What I've learned is there's a great deal of confusion regarding county home rule, a great deal of either misinformation or misinterpretation of what county home rule is and what might be the intentions of the legislature regarding the county home rule. Part of this can be attributed to the last year's filing of SJR 19. Part of this can be attributed to the fear of change that some believe will occur with county home rule. Part of this simply is due to lack of education on what county home rule specifically might be. I'm hopeful that we can learn today, and we will be able to address all these concerns. I believe that before we hear the pros and cons of the county home rule, we will all benefit if we kind of learn the background, history, definition of county home rule to do that. So before we present that speaker to give our background and information on county home rule, I would like to remind the speakers that we would like a time limit of 10 minutes each for your presentation, so try to form your thoughts and presentation in that, because what we would like to do is that after all four presenters have completed, then we open it up for Q&A, because each speaker will be answering some questions that will probably come up, and so if we could just save our questions to the end and then have a better opportunity to try to bring this all together, that would be appreciated. So members, if we could, we'll wait till everybody's presented. But to start with this, I've asked Terry Simonson to come and give us a background on county home rule. In my research and trying to learn as much as I can, Terry has been a big help to me. He knows a great deal of background on it and has agreed to be a presenter on what county home rule is, to present neither for or against, but just to give us the background. Mr. Simonson's worked for 3 Tulsa mayors. And that goes all the way back to Mayor Inhofe. He's worked with 6 different county commissioners. He's been chairman of the Tulsa County Republican Party. In 1995, he served as on the first and only county charter commission, which was appointed by the elected officials of Tulsa County and approved by the voters of Tulsa County. He's researched several cities and counties in America that have county home rule. He's been an attorney for 30 years, 18 of those in private practice. And he's written extensively regarding county rules. So I thought it was only appropriate that Mr. Simonson start it and give us the background and some history in Oklahoma county home rule. Mr. Simonson, we, committee, appreciate you giving your time, and if you would, give us that background and some definition of county home rule.
Mr. Simonson, thank you for being here, and you have the floor.
Thank you. I don't know how many of you got a copy of this. I saw it being passed around, and if you didn't, I don't know if there's any more of them right here up the front if you'd like some. As Senator Rader said, I appreciate being here, and I am not here as pro or con against county home rule, but it seems like every 15 years, whether we need it or not, we always bring this subject back, and it comes back to be talked about. And I told Senator Rader that we've been here before, and you're probably not going to hear anything we haven't heard before. You're not going to hear the opposition. You're not going to hear anything different in the pros or the cons. It just really hasn't changed. But it's an emotional issue, and it is something that I said, if everybody understands the background of it, it certainly makes the debate a lot better. When I first became aware of it, as was announced, I was working in Senator Jim Inhofe's office. And in 1978, the legislature allowed cities to have a charter. I think most of you know there's 4 statutory forms of city government. There's 1 form of county government. 4 forms. One of those allowed cities in a single sentence, which is in the statute in Title 11, saying, if you have a city over 2,000 people, you can have a charter for your government. And that's all it said. It didn't say what's in the charter, how you craft the government, how many counselors there are. Nothing like that was in it. Well, that got some people in Tulsa County thinking about that with city and county government at that time. Now, as Governor Keating knows, at that time, when I was working for Mayor Inhofe, it was a city commission form of government. Largest city in America to have a city commission form of government. 4 commissioners and a mayor, all elected at large. Each had a specific function or duty. It was partisan, 2-year terms. And that was the city government. It wasn't broken. So even though the legislature passed this authorization for cities to do that, Tulsa didn't do it. But that started some people thinking about it. And in 1987, then Mayor Richard Crawford and the chairman of the board of the Tulsa County Commission, Mel Rice, got together and said, maybe there's more things we can do together. We have 2 law enforcement offices. We have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 maintenance garages. We've got a bunch of golf courses. We've got 2 park systems. Maybe we ought to get together and figure out a way to do more with less together. So, Mayor Crawford, Mel Rice, a philanthropist from Tulsa County, Jack Zink, and Bob Dick went to Indianapolis. And they saw that Unigov concept, and they came back and said, that's a good idea. We got to try that. We got to do something like that. But there's still not enough we know about it, so we ought to study it. So Mr. Zink's foundation said, I'll pay for it if you have the University of Tulsa do it. And Dr. Ed Strong produced the report. I probably am the only person left alive that has a copy of that report on a typewriter. And he went through the whole thing. City government, county government, state statute, state constitution. It was a great review. And he pointed out some of the obstacles and some of the opportunities, but there was no real fire burning. And as history sometimes have it, you're only one election away from an idea being dead. And the next year, Mayor Crawford got beat by former Senator Roger Randall. And Roger Randall came in, and he was less interested in city and county working together. He wanted to see Tulsa have a charter and change the form of government to strong mayor with 9 counselors. That was Roger's idea. He wanted to move that forward, and so he did. So the counties went on and continued to run like counties run. But then in 1992, Representative John Bryant from Tulsa files a bill that gets passed called the County Charter Home Rule Act. It's right there. First thing, and you'll see it in the statute, first thing in Title 19, Sections 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And they're all right there. And that said that in a county of less than 550,000 people that had a city of more than 250,000 people, if you want to have county home rule, here's the process you go through. It didn't tell you what the government was supposed to look like. The legislature more or less said, you decide that at home. We're not telling you what it should look like. We're just giving you the roadmap that says if you want to do it, this is what you have to do. Well, what you had to do was the 8 elected officials in the county had to form a charter commission. Each county commissioner got to appoint 5 people, and the other 5 elected officials got to appoint 2. 25 people on a commission. I was one of them. But we were just nominated. Then our name had to be on a ballot. I don't even remember voting for myself. It was on a ballot in that November. Should the following individuals be appointed to draft a county charter, yes or no? And it passed. So within a few months after it passed, the chairman, I think was John Self at the time, got the 25 of us together and said, you have 6 months to write a charter and bring to us, the commissioners. Once we approve it, we'll put it on a ballot. We elected former Representative Bruce Nemi was our chairman. He was the chairman of that group. And in the packet, I've got a list of all the people that were from Tulsa County, good, upstanding citizens were on it. So we met, and with only 6 months to work and a lot to learn, I think we met 2 times a month for at least a half a day each time a month, and INCOG provided us all of the research and stacks of materials to read. because we had 6 months to write a charter. None of us had ever written a charter. We had people from NACO come in. We had people from OU come in, TU come in. We interviewed all the elected officials that were with the county. We did everything we thought you'd do on how do you write a charter. We were about 4 months into it when a lawsuit was filed by 4 citizens, just citizens standing. The case is Kinney versus the Tulsa County Board of Commissioners. And basically, the plaintiff's position was that section, that 8.2 section that's got that population stuff in it, that's unconstitutional because it only applies to one place and one place only, Tulsa County. In 1992, you had to go by the 1990 census. And in 1990, Tulsa had 503,397 people living in the county. So we met that box. We were under 550. And the city of Tulsa had 367,485 citizens. So we met that box. But we were the only city, county that met the box. None of the other 76 counties could do it even if they wanted to. Somehow, I don't know how this happened, but at that time, District Court Judge Jane Wiseman said, no, it's not a special law. And she ruled in favor of the county. Of course, they appealed to the Court of Civil Appeals. And when the Court of Civil Appeals got it, they reversed Judge Wiseman and said, no, that's a special law. And more or less, special laws are fine, but there's got to be a really narrow time when we're going to allow special laws. And this is not one of those times. So it struck out that section 8.2. So the charter work stopped. Then 2 years later, in 1999, back again came 2 representatives from Tulsa County, Representative Roach, Representative Bryant. This time they were trying to cure the first law that the court had ruled on and said, okay, any county can do it. Or counties above 300,000 can do it. And we don't need a commission of 25 people. That's too big. And they proposed a smaller group. Neither one of those bills went anywhere. And nothing then happened. You never really heard any more about county home rule, I didn't at least, until January 11th, 2018, when over there in the Historical Society, Mr. Rainbolt steps up to the podium on behalf of Step Up Oklahoma, and you read down all of his reforms for education and revenue, and down at the bottom it says, let counties decide what kind of government they want. Now, I'm not sure how that got on the Step Up agenda, but there it was. Now, I don't know that anybody pushed it. They really were more interested in education and revenue, of course. But somehow that made it, and that's the first time that I was aware of it. And that may have been in part what then prompted Senator Treat to file his Senate Joint Resolution 19, which said go into the Constitution and make some changes that would allow county home rule. Now, when I had done this little summary here, I had overlooked, and those of you that have this might make note, there was also a House bill filed that's still out there. House Bill 1949 was filed by Representative Dustin Roberts. And Representative Dustin Roberts' bill more or less was kind of like the original city home rule bill. It just said if counties want to have county home rule, they can have it. And he attached a repealer saying, let's just repeal everything in Section 8.1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 of Title 19. Replace that, get rid of that process, get rid of all that language, and just say if they want to do it, they can do it, with no other guidance or instruction. So that bill may or may not still be alive. So as I told Senator Rader, as I wrap this up, I said it seems like there's 3 options on the table. Option 1 is do nothing. Just leave it alone. Option 2 is if anybody does want to do something, are you going through the Constitution, like Senator Treat believes, or are you going through the statute, like Representative Roberts believes? And the third part is there was always some disagreement within our charter commission on just exactly what the Kinney case said. Did the court say, we're going to kill 8.2, but the rest of it stands? And so, they applied the severability clause, saying just because one part's bad doesn't mean the whole thing's bad. So we're going to strike that part out, but those other sections are still there? Or did the Kinney case say, no, the whole thing is bad? and none of it applies any longer. I don't know. Nobody ever knew. Nobody could ever tell us what it meant. We just know that the commission stopped working at that time, and the county commissioners never reconvened it. So that's the history of, at least in Tulsa County. It always seems to come from Tulsa County for whatever reason. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rader, you're recognized.
Bill Price is going to be our next presenter. Mr. Price is an attorney out of Oklahoma City, a business owner, and been active and has some background in county home rule. And we, Mr. Price, are very appreciative of you giving your time this morning. And he is speaking in favor of why it might be a good idea to go this way.
Thank you. My interest in this matter started as an assistant U.S. attorney in my 20s in 1978 when we began with the FBI and the IRS investigating county corruption in Oklahoma. What it led to 4 years later is the prosecution of 240 county commissioners and suppliers throughout Oklahoma. What we found was really disturbing. 50% of the material bought by counties, probably since statehood, did not exist. That is just probably not only hundreds of millions of dollars, but billions of dollars. And the other half was 10% kickbacks, which you think costs the county 10%, but it doesn't. It costed about 40% in higher prices. And we saw the prices go down 20% and then 40% because of all the middlemen and the auxiliary costs of this kickback system. That was a tremendous blow to the rural roads of Oklahoma and to the rural citizens of Oklahoma in comparison to a lot of other states. The more we got into this, the more we realized that we were not alone. Our case drifted into Texas, and I'll have you know, Texas was more corrupt than Oklahoma. For those that, and the entire South was equally corrupt. We found non-existent material deals in every county in Texas that we went into. And they had an identical system of county government to ours. And every state, the FBI and myself would lecture to assistant U.S. attorneys and FBI agents throughout the country. And almost all you had to ask was, what system of county government did you have? And if you had ours, it was corrupt. If you had a different system, it was probably honest. It was amazing to see that difference, and it wasn't cultural. It was structural in the lack of checks and balances in our system. I'll give you an example. I interviewed hundreds of county commissioners, suppliers, and various people in the course of those 4 years. All the suppliers in northern Oklahoma and southern Kansas would say the same thing, that 90% plus, it was really more like 98% of their business in Oklahoma was corrupt, and 90-some-odd% of their business in Kansas, right across the line, same culture, same people, was honest. And you'd ask, why? And they'd say, they've got a county manager system. And what they have is part-time county commissioners that are retired ranchers, bankers, whatever, in the community that act as a legislative branch. Then they appoint a county manager who is 9 times out of 10 has a road engineering degree, really knows how to build bridges and roads, and they are a check and balance on that system of government. And if he begins to get on the take, the county manager, the commissioners fire And it's got a check and balance to it that our system does not. Our system operates in 3 different districts. And, I'm not advocating changing the number of districts or the number of commissioners. They happen to have 5 in Kansas, but it works just as well whether it's 3 or 5. But when they're full-time, the tendency is to divide the county 3 ways and to have 3 county yards. Every so often you get people wanting to consolidate counties. Well, you don't need to consolidate counties in Oklahoma. We have 3 times 77 counties in effect because we have 3 county yards. And each commissioner is czar of their third of the county. And an unchecked czar of that third of the county. And if the other commissioners begin to question some purchase and truly act like a board, they'll just get cut off from the road building money that is due their part of the county. So the natural tendency everywhere was to divide the county into 3 ways, divide the budget 3 ways, have 3 county yards, have 3 commissioners, each total czar of their third of the county, and have no legislative check and balance to it. That was what our system, in what is currently our system. I looked back and I produced a packet for a handful of people, hundreds of different articles that I had in the archives, all the way back from the 1950s when the Turner and Garys of the world, the governors, yes, had advocated home rule and been unsuccessful on doing so. And a whole bunch of articles in the 80s, obviously as a result of the county commissioner scandal, advocating the same thing. But each time, it does not succeed. We are only one of, at least in the 80s, I don't know how recent it is, we are only one of 8 states that doesn't allow a county to have their own system of county government. Only 8. And I've heard that it's down to 5. So 45 states can decide their system of county government locally, and we can't. There's something wrong with that system. Now, you could presuppose that the corruption's gone. We scared everybody from doing the corrupt practices of 40 years ago. Well, that be said, the system of county government we have is very costly and inefficient. And I'll tell you why. Instead of one county yard like they had in Kansas and one professional that knew how to build roads and bridges, and it's not an easy task. In many of these counties, there's 500 rural bridges, and that is a difficult job. Most of the county commissioners that I talked to, there were exceptions, were not educated for building bridges. That wasn't their expertise when they ran for office. A county engineer that becomes a county manager is geared and educated for that purpose. There's economies of scale. You can have one county yard instead of 3 county yards. In some cases, they share equipment, but in many cases, they do not. And back then, it was a $100,000 motor grader. Now it's maybe $200,000 motor grader in 3 different yards rusting because that third of the county, each of them want to buy their own motor grader. Now, sometimes they share, but that's just an optional thing. And the tendency is to have a very inefficient system with 3 crews, 3 sets of equipment, and have no check and balance on what they're doing and efficiency. This is something that is costing rural voters, people that maintain the roads, literally hundreds of millions of dollars to this day, even if corruption is gone. But corruption won't be gone forever. 40 years, there's a lot of people that weren't even alive during this period of time. And that memory will fade. And every state, like I said, that was like our state, I'm convinced that states like Texas, it's still going on. And Mississippi, they prosecuted 87 county commissioners, and they changed their system of county government. They responded to a much lower number being convicted than we did. Back about 15 years ago, John Ward, who was one of the 5 county commissioners that I absolutely was sure was honest, because we heard on the tape, avoid John Ward, he's honest, from any number of sources, was head of the County Commissioner Association. And John invited me to speak to the County Commissioner Association, which was brave of him. He also we appeared at some of the committee hearings, and John would say privately, you're right, Bill, it needs to be, home rule needs to be passed. But, you know, you're head of the County Commissioners Association, which causes the basically everybody to lose their job from a full-time to a part-time county commissioner. And that was kind of hard to do publicly. But what he was advocating, and I throw this out as a possibility in case you can't get it done otherwise, was you ought to have a grandfather clause that makes it take effect 5, 10 years from now. That makes it so all the people that would lose their job wouldn't care. And it may be easier to pass that way. But that is the only group, not rural voters. They love the ability to decide their own road system, their own county government system. But the county commissioners themselves would be your only group that would not be in favor of this because of their self-interest. Now, people have talked about doing this in the larger counties. It's much more important to do it in the small counties because in the large counties, you can have, you need someone with a business background. It's a major business. Probably somebody with an MBA. In the small counties, it's primarily a road and bridge function. It's other functions also, but it's primarily that. And again, if you pay, let's say, $50,000 to 3 people versus pay one person $90,000, that's the county engineer, it's much, or county manager, it's much cheaper for the small counties to be able to survive. I defer on the question of whether to do it constitutionally or statutorily. I would prefer, probably just because it's easier, to do it statutorily. I talked to Andy Sironopoulos, I never pronounce his name right, who's a professor of law at OCU Law School, and he said it could absolutely be done statutorily. So you could advise, go to Andy to get that legal advice. I'm not that person. But look at changing it to allow for county home rule, and one of the options would be a county manager system that the local people could decide to change to that would be more economical and much freer from corruption than the system we have.
Senator Rader.
All right, thank you, Mr. Price. Excellent. I really appreciate that. Senator McCourtney, you would want to know that John Ward, of whom he spoke, is a Will Rogers graduate. Okay. I knew you wanted to know that. He's a Roper, and he was the first round draft choice out of Oklahoma State as well.
Did a great job.
We are very pleased that Rick Tepker could be a presenter today. Mr. Tepker, or Professor Tepker, is a professor of constitutional law at the University of Oklahoma. We appreciate your time, Professor Tepker, and you may have a handout as well. If you do, we have senators here that you could hand that to. Do you wish to speak from your seat, or would you like to come to the podium, Professor Tepker? My purpose would be that you come to the podium so I wouldn't have to turn around, but it's not all about me. Okay?
Professor, thank you for being here today, and you have the floor.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a real honor to be here. I had not expected that what I was about to talk about would be of such interest to so many people. I hope it's still of interest to people after I stop talking. Sometimes the words of law professors tend to create a somewhat different sensation than initial enthusiasm. This is a very interesting debate. It's a debate that's occurring all around the country. It's a debate in which different vocabularies are being used, masking different agendas and different purposes. My focus is on whether home rule will result in an actual, practical, governmental autonomy at the local level. The truth is, home rule is a phrase, it's a slogan, but it does not really guarantee much of anything. It's not going to guarantee that the people will make a choice as to the nature of the government that will prove to be less corrupt. That depends upon the details of what they choose. It does not guarantee that the state will actually entrust more responsibility with local government. That depends on the details of state legislation, or perhaps the details of the county charter about what the county wants to do. When looking at patterns of debate between home rule and so-called Dillon rule states, you discover, and here's a phrase that usually begins the process of deadening sensibilities when it comes from a law professor, you find the process is nuanced and uncertain and very difficult to summarize. The first basic point is you cannot get around the state law, state authority, or state structure. At least some of the arguments that I've read for home rule are about attempts to create a freedom or autonomy from state responsibility. State responsibility is baked in to the original design of our constitutional union, and despite all the controversies of recent years, that original design is still intact. It is the states who have the primary authority for taking reasonable action on behalf of the health, welfare, and morals of the people. Now, they may choose to delegate certain tasks and certain functions to the local government. And the truth is, every state in the Union has done so. Local government is a practical necessity. But the effectiveness, the efficiency, the wisdom of that decision depends on details. It does not depend either, one, on the concept or slogan home rule, or on hopes for less corrupt and less egotistical czar-like behaviors at the local level. So what is really at stake? if the debate is about Dillon's rule versus home rule, which is what some people have presented, I can tell you it doesn't make much difference. Studies of local governments have shown repeatedly that there are some states which tend to favor state responsibility and who use the rule of construction known as Dillon's rule and say if there's doubt, the state does it. Or alternatively, home rule, if there's doubt, local government does it. You'd think, seems intuitive, that those who tend to prefer, in issues of statutory construction, state government would give states more power. But that's not, in fact, the case. According to a 1980s study of the American Council of Intergovernmental Relations, the 10 states with the greatest amount of trust in local government are actually states which are so-called Dillon rule states. Now, a lot of counts vary, but Oklahoma is classified both as a Dillon rule state, where statutory interpretation tends to resolve doubt in favor of state authority, but with lots of home rule. Now, how can this be explained? Well, I tried to explain it in more detail in the handout, but I don't like reading handouts, so let me try to do it this way. The state always has the power to pass an enabling statute and to hand a certain task over to local government. And even in states where they retain a lot of authority, there's every incentive for them to do so while maintaining a degree of control. It is the details of the enabling statute, the details of the delegation that make all the difference. So, what does the pattern amount to? Well, according to one home rule state, which is very happy about having home rule, largely because of the details of what occurred before home rule, which are quite different than the history we heard described. According to that state, South Carolina, it's like a marble cake. It's a marble cake, and then a few pages later, it's fluid and it's dynamic. And even more descriptive, a few pages later in this report, which I cite in the handout, it's a pass-the-buck, fend-for-yourself federalism between states and localities. Now, I don't know about you, but a fluid marble cake does not sound very appetizing. And I wouldn't think that the friends of local government would be all that pleased with a fend-for-yourself, pass-the-buck federalism. That's not likely either to reduce corruption or to improve local government. Now, law professors can prattle on, and I worry about that. So let me tell you about one story that creates an analogy that I worried about in trying to describe the unpredictability, the potential for fragmentation. And that is a case that comes from the federal area. Congress passed a law. Now, that's no guarantee of wisdom. Congress said to the states, you've got a problem with low-level radioactive waste. Nuclear energy is a fine thing, but when the waste is produced within the territories, you must take title to that waste. And you're responsible for how the waste is disposed of, which was a big, contentious issue because nobody wanted it in their backyard. So what happened? This essentially said Congress was going to pass the buck to the states. They had to fend for themselves. They had to pay for it. And the states objected. The state of New York sued, and they won their case before the Supreme Court. But the key to that victory were the special constitutional protections for states as states in the original design of the Union. Suppose that happens, state governments versus local governments. Do local governments have constitutional or statutory protections to prevent them from suffering from unfunded mandates? from laws that preempt, laws that take over tasks that governments are currently performing? And the answer is no. There are no constitutional self-defense mechanisms, either in federal constitutional law or in state law, unless the state constitution provides them. In other words, they would not be as able to resist encroachment, preemption, fragmentation, unpredictable effects. One of the points made by the Supreme Court is that this formula has a political incentive to it. All Congress has to do is pass a law for God, motherhood, apple pie, and then tell the states to do it, and all the pain and the controversy and the difficulty and the burden and the upset is passed on the states. That blurs accountability. Voters don't know who is responsible for the services they want. If you pass a home rule statute, it's quite likely that it will be followed by a wave of legislation that blurs accountability and obscures what's really going on. This deepening problem, pass the buck federalism at the state level, could be replicated. Now, I'm not saying that will happen. I hope it won't. There's no reason to conclude that it's inherent in a home rule system. The point is there's risk. There's unpredictability. There are unintended consequences that flow from these decisions. I truly believe that what you need to do is to develop a program of strong intergovernmental relations where specifics, principles, shared objectives are the key to resolution of particular policies. Now, home rule also has the quality of appealing to the American character by saying power is distributed. It's going to be some way in which we imitate the framers. The framers, of course, divided up power into 13 states in order to prevent tyranny. But if you divide up power at the state level, the state which is supposed to be the method of getting things done in a federal union, what you're doing is you're breaking up power into smithereens with fragmentation and unpredictable effects. You do not achieve that which the framers achieved. You're not doing what James Madison hoped you would do. What you're doing is you're endangering good government, honest government, at the state level, because you're placing your faith in a slogan, home rule, which promises a lot, but according to the studies, doesn't deliver what is hoped. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind, either now or when we start questions and answers, if the speakers would all sit in this front row, it would probably make the question and answer time easier, but we can move to that when we get there. Senator Rader.
Thank you, Professor Tepker. It's always good to have Governor Keating in the building, and for you to give your time today, we really appreciate that, and are looking forward to your thoughts and your comments regarding this issue on county home rule. So, Governor, it's yours.
Thank you, Pardon me. Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity for me to be here, and Senator Rader, thank you for the invitation. I accept and adopt the factual presentation that Bill Price presented to you, so that I won't waste your time by repeating what Bill said. But I will say that years ago, when I graduated from OU Law School, the first job I had was an FBI agent on the West Coast, Seattle, San Francisco, and Berkeley. At that time, I was intrigued by the variety of government at the local level, the city level, the county level. For example, in California at that time, the law enforcement functions were county functions. They were not city functions. And I thought, well, maybe that works because you want to have highly skilled, highly trained law enforcement officers, and you usually get that if you make sure that you have highly trained and highly educated law enforcement officers. In the FBI's case, because of the corruption of that organization in the 30s, the director then, J. Edgar Hoover, required that agents be CPAs or lawyers. That is not the case today, but the purpose was, by raising educational requirements, you would have the possibility of less corruption. You would have no corruption. You would have a lot of corruption, but the possibility, hopefully, as a result of education, you would have less corruption. Did that work? Well, obviously, there's a big debate recently about what was or was not done by the FBI. But it was interesting to me that that was their view at the time. If you raise the requirements of service, you will have probably a less corrupt environment. I think perhaps I was in the State House at the time, maybe in the State Senate at the time, but my brief service in the legislature, my father at the same time was a retired business executive in Tulsa who was one of the city commissioners. We had, as Terry mentioned, 4 commissioners and a mayor. We had the finance commissioner, police commissioner, the street commissioner, and water and sewer commissioner. Dad was appointed water and sewer commissioner. He referred to himself as the commissioner of water, new and used. And, you know, we all had a good laugh. I was a little embarrassed to be the son of the water commissioner and the sewer commissioner. But that said, the problem with the city commission form in Tulsa, and there wasn't the authority to change it, was that the commissioners began to think this is not quite right to have everybody from the same zip code. And all of the 5 members of the city commission in Tulsa, virtually all of them, live within about 4 blocks of each other. And that simply struck a lot of people, myself included, is if that's what people want, that's fine. If that's the only thing they can have, that's not so fine. So later, as Terry Simonson knows, the city of Tulsa changed their charter, and now it's a ward system, if you will, a city council system, much like that we have here in Oklahoma City. Now, why do I say that? I'm a Democrat with a small d. I've always believed that the people can decide what's best for themselves. If they make an error, they can back up and change it. You remember during David Boren's term as governor of Oklahoma, he had a number, and we went to a vote of the people, of executive office level positions in our state that were elected. He changed that to appointed. The public embraced it. And then years later, we discovered that we didn't like that. We wanted to go back and make some of them elected and some of them appointed, but we weren't going to have everybody appointed, and we changed the law. That's the great genius of a Democratic representative, Republican form of government, where we trust the people to recommend to us what they want, and the people trust you at the state level to carry it out. And I'm very confident that is the case. The reason Bill asked me to join him, and Senator Rader as well, is because I was the United States Attorney in the Northern District of Oklahoma under President Reagan in '81. Both of us served some 40 years ago. I prosecuted a lot of people who were involved in corrupt practices, namely charging 10% for all the goods that were purchased by the county, and some of them were blue-skied, which meant there was nothing bought, and all that was done was to share 100% of the cost between the vendor and the county commissioner. I was astonished that something like that could happen. It was my conclusion at that time, imperfect perhaps as it could be, and I conclude with Bill Price, that because we had 3 different czars, most of whom really had no knowledge whatsoever about what they were supposed to do, and you didn't have a professional who was paid to do things right, and the 3 legislators, if you would make sure they did things right and were not corrupt. Virtually every county, Tulsa was an exception, we found, because Tulsa's county commission was very much like its city commission. Retired businessmen and women ran for county commission, and the level of integrity was very high. and we had no county commissioner prosecuted for this conduct in Tulsa County. But that wasn't the case in the rest of my federal district. And I was, as an Oklahoma, just shocked, and I was terribly upset about it. I thought, how could this be that everybody's a crook? Well, my conclusion was because you put all executive and all legislative authority in one person. There was no credentialing required. There was no professionalism in the way the county was run, no matter how small or how large, and that needed to be addressed. Is there only one way to do it? No. I don't question that there could be a number of ways to do it, but for a state like Oklahoma to go through what remains, by the way, Mr. Chairman, the most serious, the most offensive corruption, public official corruption scandal in the history of the United States, we didn't change one thing. After that serious, sleazy experience that we faced in the early 80s and before at the county level. So my view is, obviously, to look at this, like we did in Tulsa, to change a system of government, to modernize it, to change it because of the unique characteristics of the county makes abundant good sense. My view is there's no perfect system, there's no perfect anything except, I'd say my wife's up there, but in terms of a structure of county or state government, to always look at what best works for the people, what they want, how best to let them have the quality of life and the excellence of life that we can provide as a state makes abundant good sense. And I think to liberalize the ability of counties to change their system if they wish to, they don't have to under a county home rule scenario, is, in my judgment, good government, closest to the people, and hopefully a more integrity-filled government than we experienced back in the 80s at the county level. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Governor. Senator Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Governor, very much for that. We, again, honored for a fourth time with an excellent presenter, and we are so appreciative of Auditor Cindy Byrd to give up half her day to come and present to the group. She's coming up on the year anniversary of her election, and she has been an excellent worker for the state. We're looking forward very much to her comments this morning. And Auditor Byrd, thank you for joining us this morning, and we look forward to your comments.
Thank you for being here, Madam Auditor, and you have the floor.
Thank you. And it is a joy to be here this morning with you. For those of you who don't know me, I have 20 years of auditing experience in county government before being elected as your state auditor. And I'm very thankful to get to talk on this topic. I do want to talk about a couple of things from our previous speakers, and I want to thank them because they have a lot of knowledge and insight in this. First, Mr. Price talked about the expenditures of the county commissioner scandal 40 years ago. And, you know, I do want to point out, that was 40 years ago, and the commissioners in this room were probably in high school at that point. So we are dealing with a different group of people. But another and very important part I want you to understand, expenditures are not the only thing you need to be concerned about in local government. It is just one facet of the entire financial structure. So as you hear me talk about things, I'm going to talk about the enormous amount of funds that run through county government. 10 years ago, I was put in charge as the county government, or county auditor director, and we put a lot of changes in place. I came in, I saw a lot of things that needed to be fixed, and because the legislators have given the auditor the authority to implement procedures and practices at the county level, we started developing strong financial statement standards that county government had to rise to the level to. We put in a chart of accounts that really focuses on revenue streams and expenditure streams. We are not limited, the state auditor's office is not limited to the types of audits that we can perform at the county government level. We're allowed to look at anything that we have the resources and the time to look into. We also, this is something very important, we perform a surprise show up, count your cash type of an audit for county treasurers every single year because it's our constitutional responsibility to do this. And that's very important. You can't afford to let any level of government get off the track when so many people are depending on those revenue streams. We're out here looking at this. You know, another thing that I implemented was we get the data dumps of county officials' data. We are auditing at such a detailed level for these expenditures. You know, my group has developed micro programs. When we get the data dumps of counties, we are analyzing things for bidding practices. We are looking at any kind of anomalies for expenditures. Again, expenditures is a small part of county government. This has helped make county government a new form of government, the changes that we've implemented in the last 10 years. And I want you to listen to what I have to present and look at county government through a new lens. Today, county government is responsive, transparent in accountability. They are modernized, and some of the changes that we have brought about efficiencies. They're responsive, quick to give constituents the information they want. Direct access to an elected official when you walk into the courthouse. They are transparent and accountable. Did you know that, and again, we do need to think about what happened 40 years ago, but I give a great kudos to the people who were in charge at that time that completely restructured the purchasing process of county government. Did you know that for 20 years I have worked at the county government level looking at their expenditure practices, and now that I'm at the state level, I can assure you that what's going on at the county level is much stricter than what we're doing at the state level. County officials are required to file financial statements with the auditor's office each year. Those are what we take and look at and hold them accountable to. Let me tell you about something really new that has modernized county government that you cannot find at any other level of government. We have implemented a chart of accounts that has received national accolades. This new chart of accounts is actively tracking every revenue stream, every expenditure type, and we can give you data. It is coming in. The last group of counties went on July 1st of this year, and you will be able to analyze any revenue streams or any expenditure types uniformly across the state of Oklahoma. And let me just give you an example. We've had a lot of issues with incarceration rates. The number one thing we're going to be able to give you is the incarceration rate of every inmate in every county jail across the state of Oklahoma. And why do we care about that? Because jails are eating up our local government revenues. It is important to have good data that you can analyze. All of these things have worked to bring about efficiencies in county government, and that's what we're all working towards. I point these things out because of the money. Do you know that just under $5 billion runs through county government every year? That is almost the amount that you all as members are tasked with appropriating each year. It's a lot of money. A large percentage of this revenue comes from property taxes, and that property tax revenue stream is very important for our education. My mind is always going to be on safeguarding your tax dollars and putting internal controls in place so that these funds get to where they're supposed to go. My biggest questions and concerns are related to the funding. How will home rule impact the funding streams and safeguards that are currently in place? And while we're talking about that, let's just talk about the safeguards currently in county government. A lot of people can't even tell me what each county officer does, what their responsibilities are. Let's start with the county assessor. A county assessor is responsible for assessing property values and making sure that everyone is fairly taxed. But because someone had the wisdom to separate the assessor's job from the county treasurer is tasked with collecting all of that money. That way there can never be an incentive for a county assessor to manipulate taxes for personal gain. Now that the treasurer is tasked not only with collecting ad valorem taxes, the county treasurer is also tasked with looking at any taxpayer who is not properly paying their taxes, holding them accountable. on top of every other revenue stream that they're collecting. But again, someone had the wisdom not to let that county treasurer spend that money. That responsibility is put with the county clerk. The county clerk's office, and this is a big change, the biggest change from 40 years ago. The purchasing procedures. We have a purchasing agent that has to have the proper training. It is by statute. You have mandated this. That purchasing agent is required to certify every single expenditure that it followed the purchasing procedures. And no longer can a county commissioner handle the bidding process. That is handled by the county clerk's office. So these things have been addressed and fixed. And let's just talk about the county commissioners for a minute. We have 3 county commissioners. In my mind, this works like the House, the Senate, and the governor. You can relate. There are differences, there are disagreements, there's problems, and there's different personalities. But government's meant to be a little messy, to rub against each other and to try to come out with the best options that are good for the constituents. County officials like you are public servants for their people. I've heard that you view county commissioners as 3 kings with kingdoms, and some of the other complaints. But there are a lot of county commissioners who truly serve the voters who put them into office. And they're not just there as a retired person. I know many rural county commissioners who are out on a motor grader or whatever equipment they have available doing their job. For the areas of complaints that people have across the state, I do have some real solutions to propose. And I look forward to working with you on that. But I also want to remind you that OSU County Training Program, who you members fund each year, there's training that they offer. Maybe we need to mandate more of that. There are also ethics rules at the state level that don't apply for the county level. Maybe that's an option that we need to look at. Keep in mind the structure of county government and the internal controls across these offices. I am emphasizing this because I do not think the goal of county home rule is to keep these offices currently as is. Moving towards more of a county manager with a board overseeing it. So let's talk about those boards for just a minute. Board members are caring, smart people. They are volunteering their time to sit on a board and provide services. They want to serve their communities. I sit on 2 boards that take an enormous amount of my time, the Board of Equalization Subcommittee, as well as the Commissioners of the Land Office Board. I spend a substantial amount of time studying and preparing before each meeting. Because, let's face it, I'm the auditor. I can't afford to get it wrong. But when you think about some of the board members, I want you to think about the state health department crisis. I want you to think about those board members that were so highly educated in their field, they were policy driven, and they could take that part of the agency in a great direction. But they were not financial experts. And whenever it came to that, what happened? Do I need to remind anybody? Not all board members are going to be financial experts. They are not going to know what information to ask, and that's a problem. I just published an audit of a city where the city manager, who was the one person in charge with the board overseeing him, changed the policies, which resulted in increased expenditures for the city. No one was rubbing against that, making sure there were any controls in place. Let's talk about my special investigative division. I have 35 pending audits right now where there is one person in charge with the board overseeing it, and they keep coming in every month. It's a problem. One of the complaints we hear outside of county government in these other levels of government is that they can't get the records they request. Now, one thing I didn't fully elaborate on were the changes from, I get really passionate about this. one of the things that I like about county government as a taxpayer, changes that were implemented as a result of the scandal 40 years ago. Emphasis on 40. County commissioners, county officials, they are required to publish in a local newspaper every month a list of their board minutes that includes all of their expenditures and every dollar they pay. Does that come from any other level of government? Taxpayers don't even have to ask for that. It's out there. The minutes are there. We also have the salaries published annually for any taxpayer to see. Their budget is published annually in the newspaper. All of these things that make county government more transparent to the taxpayers, that's what I want as a taxpayer. The question is, how do you get your citizenry engaged in local government? I know this is a problem. School board and city council voting data on these elections prove to me and prove to you there is an unengaged electorate. So as I've been campaigning and now that I'm in office, a lot of business community members have come to me. Do you want to know what the biggest complaint they've had? Uniformity and standardization across the state of Oklahoma. This is what people want to see. They want to know that they are being treated fairly, whether they are in Cole County, where I live, or whether they're in Oklahoma County. So, as the chair of the Board of Equalization Subcommittee, we are looking at property value assessments. Why does this matter? All of it comes back to the funding streams. And the biggest funding stream that counties handle is the ad valorem taxes. And a lot of that goes to education. Let me address the questions about the guidelines or the education for county assessors. Legislators, you have mandated that county assessors have more rigorous training than any other county office. And it has worked out great. And you've just invested a lot of money in this CAMA system, the computer-assisted mass appraisal system, that is going to make sure, as an outcry from the communities, that people are taxed fairly. That system hadn't been updated, again, 40 must be the magic number, 30, 40 years. You've just invested in that. The Board of Equalization Subcommittee is working with the Center for Local Government Technology at OSU to make sure this standardization and uniformity is in place. CAMA will change things, this new CAMA system. We've just got to give it a chance to get there. Let's talk about the jails and the sheriffs. We talk about inefficiencies there. I commend the leaders at the state level for working on criminal justice reform and what we're doing to manage the resources. I see it at the local government level. I see it with a county budget being ripped apart because of health care costs for inmates in jails, unexpected costs. Again, this modernized chart of accounts that we have put in place that is going to be amazing going forward, so amazing that it got national accolades. We are going to be able to track these incarceration costs across the state of Oklahoma, and we will be able to find efficiencies. The only way you can ever find efficiencies is to have good data that you can rely on, and it needs to be something you can compare it to. I've heard the stereotypes of county government, that it's antiquated, outdated. We don't need a treasurer anymore because we don't have robbers and bandits. It's keeping us from moving into a modern society in a top state in the nation. But I want to remind you of the modernization of the chart of accounts and how I'll be able to give you better data at the county level than any other level of government. Compared to state and city government, I can make the case that county government is the most transparent and accountable, efficient, modernized, and responsive level of government. And I briefly touched on that in my opening remarks. The proof is in my audits. And I want to share that information with you. I want to show you how we can take this system and strengthen it even more. Terry talked about the 3 options this morning. But the 4th option is, let me work with you, show you where weaknesses are, and let's strengthen it. The cooperative concept of home rule already exists between counties and towns. The option for policing, road construction, rural water districts. There are options out here for cooperative agreements. As the auditor, all of my questions come back to funding. And I hear your concerns. We can't keep delivering government the same way. We can't afford to do this. Monies to roads and bridges, monies to health care. I say let's look at the data. The biggest question for me is uniformity of taxation. Do we want 77 counties going 77 different ways? What taxes, charges, or fees are going to be increased at the local level as a result of implementing county home rule? Do residents benefit from cities and counties having the ability to legislate local income tax, gasoline tax, food and beverage tax? We need only look at some of the other states that are having these problems where there is a mass exodus of residents moving out. I've got to still emphasize the funding for education that is so important at that local government level. Mr. Tepker was right. The devil is in the details anytime you deal with government. I hear the argument, let's give people the control, whatever. I want to talk to you about resources. Oklahoma has a finite amount of resources, and the only way you can ever effectively manage those resources is through data, and county government is now giving that to you. I am a solutions-minded auditor, and I ran to bridge the gap of communication between local government, state government, and the information that I know legislators need. For me, this is a conversation about finding solutions to the problem, and I want to be a part of implementing solutions to fix the problem before we go to completely redesigning local government. My door is always open for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Rader.
Thank you, Auditor Byrd. This will now send us into our Q&A session. You had a request for seating, did you, Mr. Chairman?
I think it would be helpful if all the speakers would come and sit at this front table. You'll have to share microphones, but I think that would probably help us instead of having some people answering questions to the back of our head, and I think that would be the easiest way to do this.
I would ask the members if they would specifically call upon one of the presenters to answer a question rather than generally throwing a question out there as we go forward.
So we will open it up for questions of the members. Senator Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Keating, I know in our discussions this last session where the issue of home rule, county home rule was discussed, there was always the statement that it would be more expensive to operate local government at the home rule concept. Is it necessarily going to be more expensive to operate county government just because they moved to home rule?
I would think it'd be less expensive. My view is if a particular county that is losing population or is very rural and with a modest per capita individual income, if they want to go to a system with 2 county commissioners instead of 3, or a professional county manager and 1 county executive, elected, that should be their right. In other words, I said I'm a Democrat with a small d. I think there has to be a consideration of a different government structure depending on the size of the individual county, but that's up to the residents of that county. So I think you could have, as Bill Price earlier said, a much less expensive county government if you had part-time executives in some counties. Some counties certainly wouldn't want to do that. But a part-time commissioner and then a full-time county executive who was also the county engineer or whomever else was needed to build roads and bridges.
Follow up?
Follow up.
I've got a couple of questions for Auditor Byrd, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Madam Auditor, thank you for being here today, and thank you for taking over a very vital role within our state. I think you're doing a great job there, and I appreciate your work. I do have a couple of questions. You had mentioned the county assessors in the counties, and I know that your predecessor had done some work in this area, and you were probably involved in that too, where we found that many of our county assessors were not assessing the true value of property, thereby cutting revenue for those at the county level. Could the motivation for that for some assessors be their elected officials, and they know that if they were to increase property values based upon the true valuation of property, it could jeopardize their reelection? Would that be a motivation that would be part of the concept of the assessor being elected rather than appointed by a commission?
Senator Rader, that is an excellent question, and that was the case years ago. And I would say that the work of my predecessor on the Board of Equalization subcommittee to put auditing procedures in place to make sure that didn't happen. Previously, that was always handled by the Tax Commission. I think the Board of Equalization subcommittee was appointed to make that audit even more stringent, and we've had excellent results since then. As of last year, all 77 counties are in compliance. Now, one of the things that I'm currently working on, with the encouragement of many county assessors across the state, we're working to make that performance audit even more difficult to pass. Excuse me, even more difficult to pass right now, because we want to make sure that there is uniform taxation across the state.
Follow up? I know that no county is going to be forced to go into home rule. It's going to be a vote of the people, and the will of the people would prevail. Would you see any reason why we would not allow a county to determine the will of the people in that county and vote, or to either go or not go to county home rule?
Well, Senator, I've not been seeing anything other than the one statute or the one bill proposed by Senator Treat last year, and it's my understanding that's no longer going to be considered. So until I see something that has more details, I can't say for that. I will stand by my comment that I made during my presentation that at no time will I be in favor of a board overseeing one person in charge of everything versus the structure of county government that has the safeguards in place.
Senator Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you all for being here today. Maybe Mr. Price might be the best to answer this, but I would be open to others. Would you speak to the impact of county home rule on municipalities? What are the benefits? What are the potential challenges for municipalities with that kind of system?
Well, one advantage in structure is that one thing, we looked at cities at the same time as we looked at counties for possible corruption, and we found almost no, or at least minimal amount of corruption in the cities and towns across Oklahoma, and there was 85 of them that had a county manager type system. And I commend Commissioner Byrd or Auditor Byrd for requiring all these audits. I sit there and listen to tapes of people talking about how they got around purchasing systems and how they got around bidding systems. And that tends to eliminate non-existent material deals, but it doesn't eliminate the 10% kickbacks. It is not possible for audits to be able to do that. One effect of cities is that I saw in like Comanche County as an example. The three commissioners divided up the county road money three ways, and that's the natural tendency of three full-time county commissioners. The city of Lawton had almost no roads, but they got the same amount of money. And that was true throughout the state of Oklahoma, that the city commissioner who had almost no roads got the same amount of money as the ones that had tons of road and bridge responsibilities. And it's inherent in that system to have that inequity. Now, I don't think it has much other effect on city government, other than city government serves as an example of this working. It's worked since statehood on cities and towns. This isn't some foreign concept. This is what's been in effect in Oklahoma. Now, to deal with the standardization and uniformity of assessors, I agree with Ms. Byrd, and I voted for to have a standardization on assessors, assessments throughout the state of Oklahoma. If you're worried about local government, county government, going off and combining the treasurer with the assessor, if you think that's a danger, you can always have, just like you have for the cities, you have choice of A, B, C, or D, choice of county governments. Right now, there's just A. There's no choice for local communities. And you could always build in whatever concerns you have about eliminating certain functions of county government by having a choice of set systems that they could vote on. That eliminates this problem. Now, Auditor Byrd, one of her predecessors was Tom Daxon, who is a great friend of mine, or is a great friend of mine. And Tom, all during this time, said there's no way audits can catch this stuff. No way. So I think she has too much confidence. I love that she's doing audits, and I love that she's doing transparency, and I love some of the reforms that happen. But they are not perfect by any means. They do not catch the problems we're talking about, and they certainly don't deal with the inefficiency and the added cost of our current system.
Follow up.
Mr. Chair, may I direct my question to someone else as well?
Absolutely.
All right. Mr. Simonson, would you have any comments on the impact, either benefit or challenges for municipalities if there's a change in the county structure?
Could you press the...
Oh, there, I'm sorry.
There we go.
I think you have to ask, why do counties and cities go to county home rule? There's 3,065 counties in this country. 90% or 95% of them, the U.S. Census Bureau would say, are rural or mainly rural. They don't have county home rule. So why do the rest of them have it? Well, if you look at the counties that are always held up, like Louisville, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, and all of those, they're merged city counties. But why did they do that? Most of the time, in fact, in all of those times, they didn't do it because there was corruption. They might have done it because they thought they could save money. But in most of those cases, it was for regional planning, for economic regional planning. They found that by, whether it's land use, zoning, infrastructure partnering, bringing in big business, big industry, or bring enterprise, they were stronger together than apart. And in that way, it helped the cities. Otherwise, you know, most of the time in some county home rule situations, I can name you 7 forms of county home rule. One of them is this, what we have right now. You don't have to change a thing. But what you do is that you empower the people at the county level to say, manage. You need to govern. Those are issues of yours. And as the professor stated, we have a hybrid state. This is a Dillon home rule state. We got both. It used to be, before things happened, most people don't know this, but 40 years before Oklahoma was a state, it was John Foster Dillon. It was that justice in Iowa who said, you cannot trust people at local government. And you couldn't then. That was the Tammany Hall Boss Tweed time. They were incompetent, corrupt. And so he said, basically, you know, the state, we're going to put all the local government in the doghouse, and you can only do what we let you do. When Oklahoma became a state, they adopted that. And so did every state in the country. And gradually, because we elect people like Cindy and you pass bills like open rules, open meetings, open records, you have a very aggressive press, you have less reason to control local government because you're electing really great people. So more and more the legislature has kind of relaxed the strict Dillon rule and has said, you don't have to tell us every detail on what you want to do. If this is something that will help your local community and yet you have to come to us and get our permission, you have it. They do that every year. I mean, I bet you last year the governor probably signed 30 county bills, all good bills, all bills to help counties and cities in that way, whether it was road and bridge work, public health, the libraries. You know, they work together, and sometimes home rule helps counties be a better partner, you know, be a stronger partner with cities, even if you don't change anything about who you elect. You just give them authorities, and they work well with cities.
Senator Allen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Price,
Yes.
this question for you. What changes do you believe need to be made into the County Home Rule Act in Title 19?
The Home Rule Act that I saw was a constitutional amendment. I'm not an expert on exactly how to change it. My thought is, from talking to Andrew last night, a statutory change, I would like to have it very similar to the county government home rule, city government home rule. Have it so that they can choose, counties can choose their system of county government just like cities can. And one of the options is to have a county manager system. Because I think it is much more efficient. It doesn't require, it's good to have all these controls and all these datas and everything else that the auditor does, but cities didn't even need that. There was a check and balance in that system that was local. There was, after the county commissioner scandal, there was this great big movement to put roads and bridges at the state level, to have central purchasing decide what kind of equipment to buy. I opposed all those things because they didn't realize it takes from the rural communities the control over their roads and bridges. I like the checks and balances. They're just like the federal system at a local level, and having a legislative and executive branch locally that control it. And the choice of systems could all be ones that the treasurer is the same as the assessor. I'm not an expert on that. I leave that up to you all and other witnesses, but the one change that I saw that really could make a huge difference monetarily and professionally is to at least allow the option of a county manager system.
Follow-up.
Thank you. Another question for Mr. Price. With every county being allowed to make their own rules, and we're focused here on corruption of the commissioner scandals, see what I've seen so far in this meeting. But for them to be able to set their own bond schedules as to what they're going to charge for speeding or overweight trucks or anything on the highway, do you see that being a challenge to industry as to what counties are going to be going on and what rules are going to be applied to an industry?
Not at all. Again, it's just the industry would appreciate an efficient, low-cost county government being in effect in these counties. And let me just say, we've talked about the corruption. I don't know if the corruption in any county has come back. It tends to come back after many, many years and people have forgotten about it. But just from the vantage point of efficiency and professionalism, it makes abundant sense. And in the future, when people have forgotten it, another 40 years have gone by, the corruption is unlikely to ever return. I think businesses, this isn't a uniformity I can understand on assessments. That's really important to a business. And that's a whole other hearing to look at, assessments. And that affects businesses, and I think that's a really important issue for this legislature. But uniformity of government, no business is going to care whether there's a county manager system or a regular system other than are the roads good? Is the money being poured into the roads, and am I able to get my goods to market? And this system provides for that.
Follow up?
Thank you. For Governor Keating, should the county road be, should the legislature have mandates to that charter, or should that come through the county?
Well, it depends on, in my opinion, what will provide the best cost-efficient and most professional job. And there are some things the legislature does very well. There are some things that the counties do very well. For example, in Tulsa County, when my son Chip who's in the Governor Stitt's cabinet, when Chip was a state trooper, the sheriff jail in Tulsa was privately operated. People were in coats and ties. The place was spotless, and it was very efficient. When he was transferred to Oklahoma City, we had this jungle of a jail that we are trying to reform, and the violence in that place and the inefficiencies and the brutality were stunning to him. And those are the things that the legislature needs to step in and say, we're not going to have this. If they see it, if the county at the county level doesn't appreciate the bad things that are occurring, then the states should step in. But I happen to believe the government is most efficient and works best closest to the people. But if the county fails, as certainly Oklahoma County has, in terms of the operation of its jail, what happens? The county took the position that we need to have a trust and fix this place because it's a mess.
Thank you.
Senator Simpson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Simonson, you had mentioned the consolidation examples of where counties and cities had come together in a common home rule, and I think one you mentioned was Indianapolis, and the county had come together. What's the impact on city or municipality autonomy when that occurs? Because some of the emails I've gotten have been from local municipalities concerned that they will lose their control within their city limits if the county were to go the home rule.
Sometimes they can, but sometimes you'll see, like in Louisville, for instance, that there's a county council. The members on that county council are elected from those cities. The county manager or county mayor that they have there is elected at large. So yes, they may lose some of that. Sometimes they will be allowed to have their own little small police departments, or their own rules or regulations or ordinances that pertain to their city and what they want to have in their city. I think people think that county home rule and cities lose their autonomy. As Frank knows, in city of Tulsa and Tulsa County, we have a lot of great partnerships without county home rule. The Emergency Management Agency, the library, the park system, the health department, INCOG. All of those work together right now, have for years, in a joint cooperative, partnership where the leadership came together and said, why are we both doing this? Why won't we just do it together? We've had that for a while, as Frank pointed out, with the jail. We used to have a city jail and a county jail. Then we went to one jail. Now we've kind of gone back the other way, but so sometimes it makes sense, and you don't need to have a county home rule for something to make sense. But I think oftentimes people think that county home rule is synonymous with city-county consolidation, and it's not. It's a method of governing, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with the city. It depends on, as they've talked about here, what do the people want there in their particular area.
Senator Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Governor Keating, you're talking about the legislature being involved. Do you have any recall or citing examples where a law that was simply a county administrative or organizational issue that did not impact the state?
Well, obviously, that for me as a resident now of Oklahoma County, I'm a citizen of Oklahoma County, I'm a citizen of Oklahoma City, and I'm a citizen of the state of Oklahoma. To me, I know when I was governor and the overwhelming representation in the House and Senate were Democrats, so obviously my role as leader was limited as a result. But I would sit down with people and say, we got to fix this problem because business demands it. Why did we lose some of the companies that were thinking about moving to Oklahoma City early in my watch? Number one, we weren't a right-to-work state. Number two, and that's the responsibility of the state to address. We later became a right-to-work state. Number two, we had a personal and corporate income tax. That is the responsibility of the state to address if it wishes to. But number three, several companies said to me, this place is a mess. There's trash everywhere. Now, whose responsibility is that? In the county area, it's the county's responsibility to clean that up. In the city area, it's the city's. And I think today, Oklahoma City is a renaissance city compared to what it was 20 plus years ago. So there's got to be a system of comedy and goodwill and cooperation, as Terry was saying. And I found my home city of Tulsa worked pretty darn well, melding everybody together, not by jurisdiction, but by cooperation and peer involvement, where everybody didn't look down their thin nose at everybody else. Everybody wanted to work together to make it a more efficient and more effective city. I mean, MAPS was not here in Oklahoma City the state. MAPS was the city. And it worked very, very well. So you want to unleash cities, unleash counties, and I think you unleash counties by permitting the people to decide what structure they want.
Thank you. More.
Follow up.
Following up, Auditor Byrd kind of tried to segue one of the comments the governor made there. I was reading in the paper the other day that I only work 16 weeks a year. I don't know if you saw that, but being that the legislature, is in session 16 weeks a year, some would say it would be better then to unleash the county to be able to do their work for 52 weeks a year rather than waiting on the state. How would you comment on that?
Well, I think that this question is more geared toward, do we want to put legislative authority back on county government versus the legislators keeping that authority to set the rules? I would want to hear a real need for that. I mean, I hear that's what we want to provide, that option. But are we suffering? Is there anything suffering right now? Is there anything being held back because they have to wait for the 16 weeks during legislation session? I don't know that I can name any financial need for that. Now, policies, regulations, I've not heard of those. They may be there. Financially, no.
I have a few questions. I'd like to start with Professor Tepker. We've heard, and I believe it to be true, that cities in the state of Oklahoma have what I think we're deeming home rule here. Counties do not. Kind of from your side, from the academic side, what's the downside, because city government seems to work pretty well in Oklahoma, what's the downside here to giving counties the same flexibility that we've given cities?
It depends on how you do it, and depending upon how you do it, things can be uncertain. I've been quite struck and surprised, frankly, that so much of the data being suggested as reason for reform is 40 years old, referring to a scandal that occurred before I moved here. And that strikes me as odd. If someone thinks county government is currently broken, I'd like to see that data, and then I'd like to correlate what suggestions are made to deal with current conditions and current problems. Changing the form of government, whether it be an unlimited choice or a choice as to 4 options, doesn't seem to me to be well correlated to preventing corruption or promoting efficiency. And unless there is a revision of legislative authority, it isn't even geared toward improving the capabilities of county government in the way that I think home rule is used as a term in other jurisdictions and in other debates. There seems to be a kind of disjointed quality to what I'm hearing and seeing being argued, and that kind of frustrates me because I know much of what I say sounds theoretical. So let me be as practical as I can. All depends upon the clarity and precision of what the legislature chooses to be administered and legislated through county levels. That depends, as the governor said, on comity, good intergovernmental relations, strong enforcement mechanisms like auditing mechanisms. That's the formula, not the phrase home rule. Home rule is, I don't know how to put it any other way, but I hope I'm putting it practically, beside the point.
Thank you, and that leads pretty well, and also I think some of the comments by the auditors. I'm guess now I'm trying to figure out the need here. We seem to have possibly a solution and look search for a problem, and so I want to go back, Mr. Price, and I think you answered this already. I want to make sure I heard correctly, but you don't currently see a great deal of corruption inside our counties. Is that because we talked a lot about the scandal from when I was either in kindergarten or elementary school, so I'm pretty sure I was out of diapers, but we've talked a lot about a scandal from a long time ago. But I think you have said you don't think the corruption has returned over those 40 years. Is that correct? Did I hear that correct?
I don't know. I may be able to figure it out with on the 10%, for instance, in comparing prices between us, not in Texas, but between us and, let's say, Kansas. And that's not involved in an audit. That's involved in comparing prices and where they buy the material from. I don't know one way or the other. I'm not accusing the current crop of county commissioners. They're generally very honest. But, you know, people have talked about it was 40 years ago. Well, the Constitution of the United States was 200 and some odd years ago. It had certain intrinsic values in that it had a check and balance system of government. Our county manager system has intrinsically a check and balance system. Our system does not. And you've got internal truths, whether they're 40 years ago or many, many years ago. I agree the clarity is needed, and, you know, maybe choice of set systems is a way to control it from the legislative point of view and allow county government or counties to choose their system, but within certain parameters. And maybe that's the best way to do it, rather than wholesale allow counties to do whatever they want. that makes some sense to me. City government chooses between different alternatives, and I think that is a pretty good system. What is the harm right now? Well, if a county is real small, for instance, and they feel that their certain jobs should be consolidated, or they're paying $50,000 a year to 3 people, and they want to pay $80,000 to a county engineer, they can't do it. That's the harm. The harm is that they've got 3 county yards with 3 rusting motor graders. The harm is that their professionalism is not there in many cases to be able to build these bridges that really require some expertise. And the old solution that people will raise of, oh, have the Department of Transportation take it over, that's ridiculous. I want local control, but I want local professionalism. And these truths are, whether they're 40 years old or today, the economies are there, and that should be abundant reason to change it. And it has the potential for corruption to return, regardless of how good the auditor inspector is, and how good the bidding process and purchasing procedure. I could go into depth how they got around all that. They had a whole bunch of controls back then that they got around. But the fact is, the 10% kickbacks, you don't pick that up in any audit. And without internal controls of a checks and balance system, a legislative and executive functions being separated, you will always have a system where a county commissioner is dictator of basically of a third of the county, without anybody supervising, without anybody looking over their shoulder, without any controls whatsoever. And that's fundamentally a bad system, just as much as if the founding fathers 200 years ago had set up an executive and legislative branch in the same person.
Auditor Byrd, would you agree that we have a system with very few checks and balances?
I would not agree, and I do want to mention something about the audits, if I may. 40 years ago, we were auditing with pencil and paper. Today, we are auditing with highly sophisticated data analytics. And while this is not something I would normally share in an open forum, I think I have to for this. There is something very unique that we do with county audits. As I mentioned earlier, we have a data dump that we get from each county. We have the list of expenditures. Now, what my team has designed, and this is something no one else has, my team tracks expenditures by vendor in each county. And what we are able to do with that, we lay this information fiscal year over fiscal year. So if you wanted questions, if I had questions about a sudden spike in expenditures to one vendor, I only have to look at this map across the state. I can look at 2010 and see how many expenditures were made to each vendor by county. And it may show up as plain, which means no expenditures, to different shades of red. So if we have any tip-off of a vendor who may be trying to take advantage of a county official, I can see the immediate impact across the state of spikes in vendor activity that alert us to go further and do work. Now, that is an auditing procedure I've never shared with county officials, but it is extremely effective. And when it comes to a 10% kickback or whatever, I want to point out that is nothing to distinguish city from county. That can happen no matter what. The difference is whenever you have a board that is active, who can actually look for those things and call somebody out, versus one person in charge, that's a problem. But let me further talk about the County Excise and Equalization Board that is responsible for the budgeting and overseeing things. It is a board. Why are some of these problems that we're facing not being addressed by that board?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Governor Keating, I'm going to hopefully ask you for a history lesson here. Since you've been involved with this, I mean, from the beginning of that scandal, then went through various roles in our state government. 40 years later, we haven't done anything about it. Why did we not do anything about it 40 years ago? If that's your testimony that we didn't, I guess I better back that up.
Well, no, and Senator, I don't know why. There were a lot of us who felt we should do something about it. I mean, in response to the auditor, and she's a wonderful person and a very, very competent auditor, you know how we found out about what was going on in my federal judicial district was that an FBI agent just in passing said, you know what's really interesting to us is the same piece of equipment in Kansas costs 10% less than the same piece of equipment in Oklahoma. And I said, really? Where's the money going? I said, well, you know, they're charging 10% more because it's a bribe. I went, well, go after them. I mean, what? But I'm just saying that would not have been known but for comparing vendor prices in Kansas versus Oklahoma. It simply would not have been known because all of the records were pristine. There was no evidence at all that there was corruption going on unless and until you compared prices across a state line. And let me say just one thing, if I can. When we got into the situation in Tulsa, where the commission system was everybody about 4 blocks apart, and the rest of the city had no representation at City Hall, to go to a ward, if you will, city council system is what the people in Tulsa wanted to do. If it were a county, they couldn't do that. If they felt that let's change things because this just simply is not an efficient system. Tulsa has a strong mayor system of city government. Oklahoma City has a weak mayor, city manager. Tulsa didn't want a city manager. Why? Because the executive leaders of Tulsa were generally retired business people, and they didn't want somebody else to tell them what to do. And it worked very well. Tulsa's happy with its system. Oklahoma City's happy with its system. I'm just saying with 77 counties, to have one system, and that is it, you can't change it in the least, I think is rather primitive. And in order to have, and maybe nobody wants to change one system. It could be just fine. 77 counties don't do a thing. But if the larger counties or the smaller counties decide they want to change things, maybe they ought to share a very brief anecdote on a different challenge. You all remember when the movie Twister was made. When the movie was over, several of the people associated with it said, hey, listen, why don't we all go pheasant hunting? And just come on up, and I won't say where it was, but we'll go pheasant hunting. We'll meet at the school. Well, I showed up at the school. It was a rectangular building with an elementary school, middle school, and high school, all in the same rectangular building, with a principal, and a superintendent and staff. And how much of that money went to classroom instruction? Not even 60%, not 50%, not 40%. Now, what's my story? That is a system that the people in that county ought to be able to say, this isn't any good. I don't have that kind of money to fund all this stuff. Let's change it. And a county system, which, whether it's large or small county, that is utterly inflexible is undemocratic, in my opinion. That's why I think county home rule makes a lot of good sense.
Senator Kirk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess this is going to be for Governor Keating. So, I mean, transition would be a huge thing, and certainly authority base and how that gets defined. And I appreciate that you trust the people. How would that new system be created? I think Mr. Simonson described a pretty orderly and somewhat representational process where commissioners were actually elected. Otherwise, how would that happen in any way that would truly represent desires of the people and an understanding of what professionalism is? Does that make sense?
Well, I think that is the $50,000 question. I happen to think that a free people make free decisions wisely. Sometimes they stumble. We had the Articles of Confederation for, 7 or 8 years. before we knew it just simply was unworkable. I happen to have a very strong feeling that Republican and Democrat, black, white, red, yellow, man or woman, we could decide things for ourselves. But I think Terry Simonson knows a lot of the things that were accomplished in Indianapolis and other cities, metropolitan areas in California, for example, were done hit and miss, and they came up with a system that they felt was a hit and not a miss. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's no certain way to do it, but if you have faith in the intelligence and goodwill and the integrity of every citizen in the state, then things can work out.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think to get even more detailed and granular on that, then, who is writing the new system? So I think, for instance, I'm in Oklahoma City primarily, but I also represent, 3 smaller municipalities within the city of Oklahoma City. So in terms of who would have the population to push forward certain changes, what would that voice be of those smaller municipalities within that process? I mean, I think in theory we can say we trust the people, but someone will be actually writing what those changes would be. Who would that be? How would a proposal get made?
Well, I've lived in a lot of cities, well, not a lot, but both on the West and the East Coast, and the experience that I've had just as a taxpayer and living in those communities, some are very efficient and some are terrible because people just don't want to change. They like the way it is. It depends. Obviously, you're going to have wise and involved men and women, lay people who will come together, as Terry shared with us, to sit down and say, this just simply isn't working. And I'm embarrassed as an Oklahoman that after the worst public scandal in the history of the United States, 40 years ago is a long time ago, but we didn't do squat. And I can't understand why we didn't do squat.
Follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I think I'll shift back to the theoretical since the practical is pretty challenging. I think, Professor Tepker, you might be the person. I haven't gotten to read your article yet. I look forward to reading it. You talk a lot about the importance of the supremacy of the state. Are there specific functions that you think are valuable at the county level that need to stay with county authority? We're always trying to balance that federal, state, county, municipal authority. Are there specific things you think should be decided at that county level?
Well, first, I'm not the person, because that is a practical question. It seems to me that there are a number of things that we instinctively want to have handled at the county level and the local level: zoning, police, building roads. I don't sense in this proposal a serious effort to try to change those ideas, but I'm not sure what else. The question that keeps recurring in my mind is, as a practical matter, what would these new county governments do that counties are not currently doing? And when you read the language in the various bills, well, they're going to request whatever power they can get from a county home charter. That's not a delineation of functions, and it doesn't hold out the promise of any more effective performance of services on any subject. That's why I'm surprised. This is apparently about a narrower concept that is commonly associated with the term home rule. It's about deciding what form of government is going to exist at the county level, not what the county government will do. And I think when you want to get to the issues of actual local responsibility, actual local discretion, you have to get substantive. You have to decide what it is you want counties to do. I suspect my instincts are not much different than everybody in the room. Police, sheriff, county, auditing. I like a nice, strong auditing check and balance in the state system. I don't think I would favor diversified home rule as to auditing. I suspect I've got that message right, don't I? Yeah, okay.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you all for being here today. Senator Rader, do you have any closing comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and specifically thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing this to be held, and appreciate you working out the time to do this. I want to thank the presenters, for a very respectful, issue-oriented presentation. I trust that you felt respected as well when we have discussions like this, and hear how each person is respected and the way it's presented. It's another reason to be proud to be an Oklahoman, and we appreciate that. Members, thank you for being here. For all the reps here from city, counties, show your interest today. We thank you for your travel here. And with that, I have nothing more for this part of our interim study.
Thank you, Senator Rader. Thank you to all of our speakers, and we are adjourned.